My daughter called me from her best friend's party. Dad, he's here. My stalker is here. I saw him slip something into a drink. Please come get me. Her speech suddenly started slurring, and before she could get another word out, I heard her drooling. Baby! My voice was interrupted by a loud thump, her falling over. The line went dead. My heart stopped completely. Zara had been drugged. The stalker finally got to her. I grabbed my keys and ran to my car so fast I knocked over a chair. I drove like a maniac, ran every red light I saw. My mind was racing. What if he took her? What if I'm too late? I kept calling Zara's phone over and over. It went straight to voicemail every time. 14 minutes felt like 14 hours. When I finally pulled up, the music was blasting so loud I could hear it from the street. The front door was wide open with people standing outside smoking and talking like nothing was wrong. I pushed past them without saying anything. Inside, it was packed with bodies, teenagers dancing and laughing. I couldn't see Zara. My panic was taking over. I started opening every door I saw without knocking. First door, 2 people making out on a bed. Second door, someone throwing up. My heart was pounding harder with every empty room. Where was my Zara? I ran upstairs and tried the first bathroom door. It was locked. I pounded on it with my fist. Is anyone in there? I yelled over the music. No answer. That was weird. Why would a bathroom be locked with the lights inside it off and nobody answering? Something felt wrong. I kicked the door until the frame cracked. There I saw her, my Zara lying on the floor, her red dress ripped at the shoulder. She was unconscious and not moving. The bathroom window was wide open with a muddy shoe print on it. Her stalker did this, then escaped out that window. I dropped to my knees next to her. Baby, wake up, please wake up. I checked her pulse, still breathing. Thank God. I picked her up carefully and carried her down. I put her gently in my car and drove straight to the hospital. The doctors examined her and ran tests. They said she'd been drugged with opioids but would be okay. She just needed to sleep it off. Zara woke up a few hours later looking confused and scared. I held her hand and told her she was safe now. The next morning, her boyfriend Rory showed up at the hospital. Oh my God, are you okay? I was so worried about you. I watched him stroke Zara's hair gently and get her water from the pitcher. He'd never been this attentive to her, not even when her lupus flared up. Where were you? I asked him. My voice came out sharp. You were at that party with her. Rory looked startled. I know. I'm the worst boyfriend ever. The worst. I hate myself. I don't deserve her. He started grabbing his own hair, acting like he was trying to convince me of something. I turned to Zara. My voice got softer. You said you saw him. Did you catch his face, sweetheart? Her hands started shaking. She pulled the hospital blanket tighter. He has a mask on every time I see him following me around town. Yesterday he had the mask again. She took a shaky breath. But in the bathroom, he took it off just before I blacked out. I leaned closer to her bed. Can you recall anything about him? She was shaking. Not much. I just remember his face tattoo, like a big tribal design on his left cheek, black ink. My face went ghost white. My blood turned to ice and my ears started ringing. I had to leave for the bathroom to throw up. My best friend Dominic had that exact tattoo. We'd been best friends for 30 years. I stood up fast and grabbed my keys. I need to go right now. I drove to Dominic's house going way over the speed limit. My mind was spinning. Could it really be him? When I got there, I pounded on his door until my knuckles hurt. He opened it confused and sleepy. Hey man, what's going on? I pushed inside. We need to talk right now. About what? Dominic wouldn't look me in the eye. My daughter was attacked last night at a party. My voice was shaking. She saw a face tattoo. Tribal design. Black ink. That's your tattoo. Are you my daughter's stalker? He went completely quiet. His whole face changed. The color drained out. He hesitated for a long time. Then finally he said very quietly, Yes. I punched him so hard he dropped and started leaking blood. You're my best friend of 30 years. Why? He tried to back away, but I punched him again. Zara's boyfriend paid me, Dominic suddenly yelled. Rory paid me to do it. I did a double take. Was he messing with me? What are you talking about? Dominic spit blood from his mouth. Rory gave me $10,000 to stalk her. I needed the money. I stepped back in shock. Please say you're lying. I'm not. He was crying now. Rory wanted her to live in constant fear, Dominic said. He said that if she's scared, she's easier to control. The stalking makes her depend on him. My stomach dropped like I was falling. I felt sick. Zara's boyfriend and my best friend, the man she called Uncle Dom, were torturing her psychologically. I walked out to my car and started driving. When I walked into her hospital room, she looked up at me with tired eyes. Dad, what's wrong? I turned to Rory. We need to talk about your boyfriend. I looked Rory straight in the eye. My voice came out flat and cold. Rory paid Dominic $10,000 to stalk you and keep you scared so you'd depend on him more. Zara's face went completely white. The color just drained out like someone pulled a plug. She started shaking so hard the hospital bed actually rattled. Her hands gripped the blanket and her whole body trembled. Rory jumped up from his chair fast. His voice got loud and defensive. That's insane. Your dad is lying because he's upset and looking for someone to blame. He reached for Zara's hand, but she yanked it away like he burned her. She pulled her arm back against her chest. Zara stared at Rory with this look I'll never forget. Complete horror mixed with betrayal. Her eyes were huge and wet with tears. Uncle Dom has that exact tattoo. Her voice cracked when she said it. The one I saw last night. Tears started streaming down her face as the reality hit her. She was putting it all together. Rory's whole act fell apart right there. He started backing toward the door. His confident mask just crumbled. Baby, please, let me explain. It's not what it sounds like. But Zara screamed at him to get out, just screamed it at the top of her lungs. A nurse came running in to see what was wrong. She looked between all of us, confused and alarmed. Hospital security showed up a minute later. 2 big guys in uniforms. They escorted Rory out while he was still trying to talk his way back in. He kept looking over his shoulder at Zara, saying her name, trying to get her to look at him. She turned her face to the wall. I pulled out my phone and called Detective Shepard immediately. My hands were shaking as I dialed. She answered on the second ring. I explained everything Dominic confessed about the payment and stalking arrangement, every detail I could remember. She listened without interrupting. Then she told me to stay at the hospital and she'd be there within the hour. Her voice was serious and focused. Zara completely broke down, sobbing in my arms after I hung up. She grabbed onto me like a little kid. He paid someone to terrorize me? My own boyfriend? And Uncle Dom agreed to do it? I held her while she cried. My heart was breaking for what they put her through. I couldn't find words. What do you even say to that? Detective Shepard arrived 50 minutes later with another officer, a younger guy with a notepad. They took detailed statements from both of us. She recorded everything on her phone, asked us to repeat certain parts. She took photos of Zara's injuries with her camera, the bruises on her arms, her torn dress that the hospital had bagged as evidence. She explained this was now a criminal investigation involving conspiracy, assault, and drugging. Multiple felonies. She was calm, but you could tell she was angry about what happened. The detective headed straight to Dominic's house with backup to arrest him before he could run. I gave her his address and she promised to keep me updated on what happens. Zara just stared at the wall after they left, not speaking, not responding to anyone. Her eyes were open, but she looked somewhere far away. I tried talking to her, but she didn't react. It was like she was in shock. I sat next to her bed and waited. 2 hours later, Detective Shepard called. Dominic was arrested without incident and was being held without bail. He confessed everything again on recording, including details about the payment arrangement and Rory's instructions to escalate the fear. She was getting a warrant for Rory's arrest right now. The judge was signing it as we spoke. I thanked her and hung up. My son Austin drove in from 2 hours away after I called him about what happened. He'd left work immediately. I heard his footsteps running down the hospital hallway. He walked into Zara's hospital room and took one look at his sister's devastated face. Then he had to leave. He went out to the hallway and I heard a loud bang. He punched the wall. I followed him out. We both just stood there trying to process this nightmare. Austin's knuckles were bleeding. His chest was heaving. I'm going to kill him! His voice was shaking with rage. I put my hand on his shoulder. The cops have him. Let them handle it. But I understood exactly how he felt. We stood there in the hospital hallway for a few minutes while Austin's knuckles kept bleeding. A nurse walked past and gave us a concerned look, but didn't stop. I put my hand on his shoulder and we went back into Zara's room together. She was still staring at the wall with that blank expression. Not blinking, not moving. A woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a bun knocked on the doorframe. She introduced herself as the hospital social worker and asked if she could come in to talk with us. I nodded and she pulled up a chair next to Zara's bed. She spoke in this calm, gentle voice, but her words were direct and serious. She explained that what happened to Zara wasn't just stalking or assault. It was psychological abuse designed to break her down over time. She said victims of this kind of manipulation often develop severe anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress. The fear doesn't just go away when the abuser is caught. Zara finally looked at her instead of the wall. The social worker pulled out a folder with pamphlets and business cards. She recommended Zara start seeing a trauma therapist right away, someone who specializes in intimate partner violence and psychological control tactics. She handed me 3 cards with names and phone numbers. One of them was Melania Wynn. She said Melania was excellent with young women who'd been through what Zara experienced. The social worker also gave us information about victim advocacy services and support groups. She explained the legal process ahead and how a victim's advocate could help Zara through court proceedings. Then she looked directly at Zara and told her this wasn't her fault, that she didn't do anything wrong by trusting her boyfriend, that abusers are skilled at hiding who they really are. Zara started crying again, but this time it felt different. Less shock and more grief. After the social worker left, Zara was quiet for a long time. Austin sat on one side of her bed and I sat on the other. The 3 of us just existed in that room together, while machines beeped and footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Then Zara's voice came out small and shaky. She asked if she could come stay at my house instead of going back to her apartment. She said she couldn't be alone right now and didn't feel safe anywhere. I told her of course she could stay as long as she needed. My house was her house. Austin said he'd help her get her stuff from the apartment so she wouldn't have to go back there. The hospital discharged Zara that evening with instructions about the medication they gave her and signs to watch for. I drove her home in complete silence. She stared out the window the whole time. When we got to my house, I showed her to the guest room and she just sat on the edge of the bed. I asked if she needed anything and she shook her head no. I left her door open a crack and went to my own room. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept listening for any sound from her room. Around 2 a.m, I heard screaming. I ran down the hall and found Zara sitting up in bed drenched in sweat. Her hands were shaking as she checked the window lock over and over. She kept saying someone was outside. I looked out the window, but the yard was empty, just shadows from the streetlight. I tried to calm her down, but she was breathing too fast, hyperventilating. I sat next to her and told her she was safe, that both Dominic and Rory were in custody. She finally stopped checking the lock and grabbed onto my arm. An hour later, the same thing happened. More screaming, more checking locks. This time she checked the bedroom door too, made me prove it was locked from the inside. The third time it happened around 5 a.m, she begged me not to leave her room. I pulled the chair from her desk over next to the bed and told her I'd stay right there. She finally fell back asleep around 6. I sat in that chair watching her breathe and feeling completely helpless. My phone rang at 8 and woke both of us up. It was Detective Shepard. She said Rory had been arrested at his parents' house early that morning. He was trying to pack a bag when officers showed up with the warrant. He immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to say anything, but his bank records told the whole story. A $10,000 withdrawal on the exact same day Dominic deposited $10,000. The dates matched perfectly. She said the evidence was solid, and the prosecutor would be filing formal charges today. I thanked her and hung up. Zara asked what the detective said, and I told her Rory was in custody. She didn't react, just stared at her hands. Austin showed up around 9 with coffee and breakfast sandwiches. He told me he'd called his boss and taken the whole week off work. He wanted to stay and help take care of Zara. I was grateful because I didn't know how to do this alone. Austin was mad, really mad. He kept pacing around the kitchen and clenching his fists. He said he wanted to drive to the jail and handle Rory himself. I understood that feeling completely, but I told him we needed to let the legal system work. If we did something stupid now, it could mess up the case, make things worse for Zara. He knew I was right, but I could see how hard it was for him to accept it. The next day, I called Melania Wynn's office and explained the situation. Her receptionist said she had an opening that afternoon and could fit Zara in. I drove Zara to the appointment and waited in the lobby. She was in there for almost 2 hours. When she came out, she looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. But she said it helped to talk to someone who understood what psychological abuse does to a person. Melania wanted to see her twice a week at first, maybe more if Zara needed it. Over the next few days, Detective Shepard kept calling with updates. She'd gotten Rory's phone records from the carrier, dozens of calls between him and Dominic over the past 6 months. She also recovered deleted text messages from both their phones. The messages were detailed and specific. Rory telling Dominic exactly where to follow Zara, what mask to wear so she wouldn't recognize him, instructions about escalating the fear without getting caught. One message said to make sure she saw him at the coffee shop she went to every Thursday. Another said to follow her home from class but stay far enough back that she'd notice but couldn't identify him. The planning was careful and deliberate. Shepard said the premeditation would make the charges more serious. A week after everything happened, I had to go to the police station to give another formal statement. This time about my confrontation with Dominic at his house. The detective needed me to walk through exactly what was said and what happened. She recorded everything and had me sign papers. Then she asked if I wanted to see Dominic's confession video, the official one he gave at the station after his arrest. I said yes, even though part of me didn't want to. She took me to a small room with a TV and played the recording. Dominic sat at a metal table in an orange jumpsuit. His face was bruised where I'd hit him. He cried through the whole thing, admitted everything, taking the money from Rory, following Zara for months, wearing the mask and tribal makeup to hide his tattoo at first, deliberately scaring her in parking lots and outside her apartment, escalating when Rory told him to. He said he needed the money for gambling debts and convinced himself it wasn't really hurting anyone, just following her around. He didn't think about what it was doing to her mentally. Watching him cry and apologize made me feel sick. 30 years of friendship, and I never knew he was capable of something like this. How did I miss it? 2 days later, a man named Reed Bear called me. He introduced himself as the prosecutor assigned to the case. He wanted to meet and discuss the charges being filed. I drove to the courthouse and met him in his office. He was maybe 50 with gray hair and glasses. He laid out folders on his desk with all the evidence. He explained Rory was charged with conspiracy to commit assault, stalking by proxy, and drugging with intent to commit sexual assault. Each charge carried serious prison time. Dominic faced similar charges plus accepting payment for stalking. Reed said if convicted on all counts, Rory could get 15 to 20 years. Dominic could get 8 to 12. He asked if Zara would be willing to testify when the time came. I said I'd ask her, but wasn't sure she was ready for that yet. He understood and said we had time. The next morning, I took Zara to the grocery store because we needed food. She'd been afraid to leave the house, but agreed to try. We were in the cereal aisle when she suddenly froze. A guy in a black hoodie was standing near the end of the aisle looking at his phone. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just shopping. But Zara started breathing fast. Her hands started shaking. She grabbed my arm and said we needed to leave right now. I could see the panic taking over her face. Austin was with us, and he quickly guided her toward the exit while I abandoned our cart. By the time we got to the parking lot, she was hyperventilating. Couldn't catch her breath. Austin helped her into the back seat, and she curled up with her knees to her chest. I sat next to her and told her to breathe slowly. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It took 15 minutes before she could breathe normally again. She kept apologizing and saying she felt stupid. I told her she had nothing to apologize for, that her fear made sense after everything that happened, but I could see how much this was consuming her life. She was scared to leave the house, scared of everyone. The fear Rory had manufactured was still controlling her even though he was locked up. The next day, I drove Zara to her appointment with Melania. She sat quiet in the passenger seat, staring out the window the whole way there. When we got to the therapist's office, Melania had us both sit down together. She looked at Zara with kind but serious eyes and started explaining what she'd observed over their sessions. Zara was showing clear signs of PTSD and severe anxiety disorder. The betrayal by someone she trusted romantically combined with Uncle Dom's involvement created a perfect storm of trauma. Melania said recovery would take significant time and consistent therapy. She recommended twice-weekly sessions for at least 6 months, maybe longer. Zara nodded slowly and asked if she'd ever feel normal again. Melania told her yes, but it would be hard work and there would be setbacks along the way. I watched my daughter's face and saw how tired she looked, like she'd aged 5 years in the past few weeks. We scheduled the appointments and drove home in silence. That same afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Reed calling to tell me about a development in the case. Rory's expensive defense lawyer had contacted him trying to negotiate a plea deal. They were claiming Rory never intended physical harm, and the stalking was just meant to make Zara more attentive to the relationship. Reed's voice got hard when he told me his response. He said, "Absolutely not, we're going to trial. No deals, no reduced charges." Rory was going to face every single count in front of a jury. I thanked him and hung up feeling a small bit of satisfaction. At least someone was fighting for my daughter the way she deserved. 2 days later, I found an envelope in my mailbox with a return address from the public defender's office. I opened it standing right there by the mailbox. It was a letter from Dominic's lawyer asking if I'd be willing to write a character reference for his sentencing hearing. They wanted me to tell the judge about our 30-year friendship and what a good person Dominic had been before this happened. I read it twice to make sure I understood what they were asking. Then I tore it into pieces and threw it in the trash can. He destroyed my daughter's sense of safety and our 3 decades of friendship for $10,000. There was nothing good I had to say about him anymore. The following week, Zara called me from her apartment sounding weak and in pain. Her lupus was flaring up badly from all the stress. Her joints were swollen and she could barely move. I drove over immediately and found her curled up on the couch, unable to stand. I took her straight to the emergency room. The doctors examined her and ran blood tests. They said her immune system was attacking her joints and organs. Trauma can trigger these episodes in lupus patients. They admitted her for observation and treatment. Watching her suffer physically on top of the emotional damage made me feel completely helpless. She stayed in the hospital for 3 days getting IV medications and steroids to calm her immune system. I slept in the chair next to her bed every night. During her hospital stay on the 2nd day, Detective Shepard called with surprising news. 2 other young women had contacted her saying they dated Rory before Zara. Both described similar patterns of him being inattentive until they tried to leave, then suddenly becoming obsessively controlling. One woman said she had a stalker she never identified who stopped the exact week she broke up with Rory. The detective was documenting everything and passing it to Reed for the case. This wasn't just about Zara anymore. Rory had done this before to other women. Within hours, Reed called me sounding more energized than I'd heard him yet. He was thrilled about the additional victims coming forward because it established a clear pattern of predatory behavior. He reached out to both women about testifying, and they both agreed to help. The case against Rory was getting stronger every day. He told me this pattern evidence would be devastating to Rory's defense. No jury would believe this was just a misunderstanding or a one-time mistake. When Zara got released from the hospital, I drove her straight to her next therapy appointment. She'd missed her regular session while she was admitted. Melania asked how she was feeling, and Zara surprised both of us. Instead of crying or looking scared like usual, her face got hard. She told Melania she was furious that Rory stole months of her life and made her afraid of her own shadow. Her voice shook, but it was from anger, not fear. She said she wanted him to pay for what he did to her and those other women. Melania smiled and said, "Anger is a healthy part of processing trauma." It meant Zara was moving from victim to survivor. It was her first small breakthrough, and I felt hope for the first time in weeks. The next day, Austin had to go back to work 2 hours away. He'd used up all his vacation time staying with us, but he called Zara every single day to check on her, sometimes twice a day. Their sibling bond had gotten so much stronger through this crisis. I heard him on the phone telling her he was proud of how she was fighting to heal, even when it was incredibly hard. Zara would smile when they talked, which was rare these days. He promised to come back for the preliminary hearing. Over the following weeks, I started having my own nightmares. I'd wake up sweating after dreams about not protecting Zara and missing all the signs that something was wrong. I kept replaying moments with Dominic looking for clues I should have caught. The gambling debts he mentioned once, the new watch he bought last spring. Times he seemed stressed about money. Why didn't I ask more questions? The guilt was eating me alive, even though logically I know I couldn't have known what he was doing. My own therapist told me I was carrying too much blame for things outside my control, but knowing that didn't make the nightmares stop. 3 weeks after Zara's hospital stay, the preliminary hearing finally happened. I drove Zara to the courthouse early in the morning. Austin met us in the parking lot. We went through security and found Reed waiting in the hallway outside the courtroom. He walked us through what would happen and told Zara she didn't have to testify today. Just be present. When we entered the courtroom, I saw them both. Rory and Dominic sitting at separate defense tables in orange jumpsuits, both looking smaller and older than I remembered. Rory's expensive lawyer sat next to him in a suit that probably cost more than my car. Dominic had a tired-looking public defender shuffling through papers. The judge came in and everyone stood. The hearing moved fast with lawyers arguing about evidence and probable cause. Rory wouldn't even look at Zara the whole time. He kept his eyes on the table in front of him. But Dominic tried to catch my eye multiple times. Each time I turned away and stared at the wall. At the end, the judge ordered both of them to stand trial on all charges. Bail was denied. They'd stay locked up until the trial date. When the judge's gavel came down, Zara grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard. We stood up to leave, and I kept my arm around Zara's shoulders as we walked toward the courtroom doors. Austin was right behind us, carrying Zara's jacket and water bottle. The hallway outside was crowded with people from other cases waiting around. We were almost to the exit when I heard someone call out behind us. I turned around and saw Rory's parents pushing through the crowd toward us. His mother had tears streaming down her face and mascara running everywhere. His father looked pale and sick. They stopped a few feet away and his mother reached out like she wanted to touch Zara. I stepped between them immediately. His mother's voice came out shaky and desperate. "Please, we had no idea. We're so sorry." I held up my hand to stop her from coming closer. "Stay away from my daughter." My voice was flat and cold. His father started saying something about how they raised him better than this, and they were shocked. I didn't want to hear it. I took Zara's arm and steered her toward a different exit on the opposite side of the building. Austin followed us and kept looking back to make sure they weren't following. When we got outside, Zara was shaking again. We sat in my car for 10 minutes before she felt calm enough for me to drive home. 3 days later, Zara had her regular appointment with Melania. I drove her there and waited in the parking lot like always. The session ran longer than usual. When Zara came out, her eyes were red, but she looked lighter somehow. On the drive home, she stared out the window for a while before she started talking. She told me she'd spent most of the session talking about how stupid she felt. How could she not see what Rory was doing to her? How could she trust him so completely when he was the one hurting her the whole time? Her voice got quiet and sad when she said it. I started to tell her she wasn't stupid, but she held up her hand. She said Melania had explained something that helped. Abusers are really good at manipulation. They specifically look for people who are trusting and kind, because those people are easier to control. Zara's ability to trust wasn't a weakness. It was actually a strength that Rory took advantage of. Melania told her that being a trusting person is a good thing, and she shouldn't let what happened take that away from her. Zara said hearing it put that way made her feel a little less broken. Like maybe she could forgive herself someday for not seeing it sooner. That same week, Detective Shepard called me with an update. She'd gotten a warrant for Rory's laptop and phone records. What she found made her physically sick. Rory's search history was full of stuff about psychological abuse. He'd looked up terms like trauma bonding and learned helplessness. He'd researched how to make a girlfriend dependent and scared. There were articles about controlling behavior and manipulation tactics all saved in his bookmarks. The most disturbing part was he'd been researching this stuff for over a year before he even met Zara. This wasn't something he stumbled into. He'd planned it out and studied how to do it. Detective Shepard said the digital evidence proved how calculated everything was. It wasn't just a bad boyfriend making mistakes. It was someone who deliberately set out to psychologically torture another person. She was sending everything to Reed for the trial. The jury would see exactly what kind of person Rory really was. A week after that, Reed asked us to come to his office for trial preparation. We sat in a conference room with a big table covered in folders and papers. Reed was patient and kind when he explained what would happen at trial. He walked Zara through every step of the process. Where she would sit, how the lawyers would ask questions, what she was allowed to say and what she needed to avoid. He told her Rory's lawyer would try to make her doubt herself and twist her words. That was their job and she shouldn't take it personally. Reed practiced asking her questions the way the defense would. Hard questions that made her voice shake, but he was gentle about it and kept reminding her she was doing great. Zara was terrified of having to face Rory in the courtroom. Her hands were shaking the whole meeting, but she kept saying she was determined to tell her story. She wanted the jury to know what he did to her. Reed smiled and said her strength would come through when she testified. Juries can tell when someone is telling the truth. That night after Zara went to bed, I went out to the garage. I'd been holding everything together for weeks, being strong for Zara, dealing with police and lawyers, acting like I had it under control, but I didn't. I sat down on the concrete floor next to my toolbox and just started crying, huge, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. I lost my best friend of 30 years. My daughter was tortured by people she trusted, and I felt like I'd failed to protect her from all of it. Austin must have heard me because he came into the garage and sat down next to me without saying anything. He just sat there while I cried and fell apart. After a long time, he put his hand on my shoulder. He didn't try to tell me it wasn't my fault or that everything would be okay. He just stayed with me while I processed all the pain and anger and grief I'd been pushing down. The next day, I had my appointment with Melania. Zara had insisted I go after Austin told her about finding me in the garage. Melania's office was small and comfortable with soft chairs and calm colors on the walls. She asked me how I was doing, and I tried to give her the usual answer about being fine. She just looked at me and waited, so I told her the truth. I was a mess. She nodded like she expected that. She said I was showing clear signs of trauma and complicated grief. I was grieving the friendship with Dominic, dealing with massive guilt about not protecting Zara, processing rage at both men for what they did. All of that at the same time was too much for anyone to handle alone. She recommended I start seeing a therapist regularly, at least once a week to start. I hated the idea of therapy. It felt weak somehow. But Melania said taking care of my mental health so I could be there for Zara was actually the strongest thing I could do. I made an appointment with a therapist she recommended, even though everything in me wanted to refuse. 2 weeks later, Zara's former roommate called me out of nowhere. She said she'd been thinking about everything that happened and remembered something weird. Rory was always checking Zara's location on his phone. Like constantly. He'd ask where she was even when they weren't together. The roommate said at the time she thought he was just being an overly attached boyfriend. But now looking back, she realized he was probably coordinating with Dominic. He'd check where Zara was and then tell Dominic when to show up as the stalker. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I thanked her for calling and passed the information to Detective Shepard. She said it fit perfectly with the phone records they already had. More evidence of how planned out everything was. Around the same time, Dominic's public defender contacted Reed again. This time they were asking if Dominic could write an apology letter to Zara. Reed called to ask what we wanted to do. He said we didn't have to accept any communication from Dominic at all. That was completely our choice. I asked Zara and her answer was immediate. She never wanted to hear from him again. Not an apology letter, not anything. I agreed completely. Reed told the public defender no, and that was the end of it. As the trial date got closer, Reed had us come back to his office multiple times. He walked us through every single piece of evidence. The bank records showing the $10,000 payment, the phone logs with hundreds of calls between Rory and Dominic, the text messages with specific instructions about stalking, Rory's search history about abuse tactics, statements from the 2 other women who dated him, Dominic's confession on video, Detective Shepard's investigation notes. All of it together created a case that seemed impossible to argue against. Reed was confident about getting a conviction, but he warned us that sentencing could be unpredictable. Judges had a lot of freedom in how much time they gave. We might not get as many years as we hoped for. He just wanted us to be prepared for that possibility. The day before one of our prep meetings, Zara went to the pharmacy to pick up her lupus medication. I was at home when my phone rang. It was someone from the pharmacy saying Zara needed me to come get her. I drove there as fast as I could. When I got there, I found Zara sitting outside on the curb. A pharmacy employee was sitting next to her with a hand on her back. Zara was breathing way too fast and couldn't catch her breath. Her whole body was shaking. The employee explained that Zara had seen someone inside who looked like Rory. She'd had a complete panic attack right there in the store. They'd helped her outside and called me. I sat down next to Zara and talked to her slowly until her breathing started to calm down. It took almost 20 minutes before she could stand up and walk to the car. On the drive home, she cried and said she felt like she was going backwards. Just when she thought she was getting better, something like this would happen. I told her recovery wasn't a straight line. Melania had told me that. 2 steps forward and 1 step back was still progress. But I could see how defeated she felt, and it broke my heart all over again. 3 days later, I sat in a therapist's office for the first time in my life. The room had soft lighting and comfortable chairs, but I felt like I wanted to run out the door. My therapist asked me to talk about what brought me in, and I started explaining about Zara and Dominic. The words came out harder than I expected. I kept having to stop and take breaths. When I got to the part about 30 years of friendship being a lie, my voice cracked. I told her I felt like I failed Zara by not seeing what was happening and by trusting someone who would hurt her for money. The therapist listened without interrupting, and then said something that surprised me. She told me I was carrying guilt for things I couldn't have controlled. Nobody could predict that their best friend would accept money to stalk their daughter. I wanted to argue with her, but part of me knew she was right. That evening, Zara came into the living room where I was watching TV. She sat down next to me and took a deep breath like she was getting ready for something hard. She told me she wanted to move out and get her own place after the trial ended. My first reaction was to say no immediately. Keep her safe at home where I could protect her. But she explained that she needed to prove to herself she could be independent and not afraid anymore. Living with me felt safe, but it also felt like hiding. I wanted to argue so badly. Tell her she wasn't ready. But looking at her face, I could see how much she needed this. So I just nodded and told her we could start looking when she felt ready. Austin drove up the following weekend to help Zara look at apartments. I went with them to the first few places. Austin asked about security systems at every building. He checked the parking lots to make sure they had good lighting. He tested the locks on doors and windows. Zara seemed grateful for his protectiveness, but also a little annoyed when he was rejected 3 places in a row. Finally, they found a place in a neighborhood I knew was safe. The building had a doorman who sat at a desk in the lobby 24 hours a day. Security cameras covered every entrance and the parking garage. The apartment itself was on the 3rd floor with a balcony that overlooked a busy street. Austin approved and Zara loved it. She put down a deposit that same day. The week before trial, Reed asked Zara to come to his office every afternoon to practice her testimony. I drove her there and sat in the waiting room while they worked. The first day she came out looking exhausted and shaky. But by the 3rd day, she walked out standing taller. By the 5th day, she looked almost confident. Reed told me she was getting stronger every time they practiced. He said watching her find her voice and refuse to let fear silence her was remarkable. On the last practice day, I asked if I could sit in and watch. Zara said yes. I sat in the corner while Reed asked her questions, and she answered clearly and calmly. She described the stalking, the fear, the attack, the betrayal. Her voice never wavered. I felt so proud of her I had to look away so she wouldn't see me tearing up. Reed called me 2 days before trial to say Dominic took a plea deal at the last minute. He agreed to plead guilty to stalking and conspiracy in exchange for testifying against Rory. His sentencing would be delayed until after Rory's trial, so he had motivation to cooperate fully and tell the truth. Reed said this was good for our case because it meant Dominic would have to describe everything in detail on the stand. The jury would hear directly from him about the payment and the instructions. I felt sick thinking about having to sit in that courtroom and watch Dominic testify, but I knew it had to happen. The courthouse was cold and smelled like old wood and floor cleaner. I sat in the front row behind the prosecutor's table with Zara next to me and Austin on her other side. Dominic was brought in wearing an orange jumpsuit with his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked smaller than I remembered, thinner. When they called him to the stand, he walked up slowly and sat down. Reed started asking him questions, and Dominic answered in a quiet voice. He described meeting Rory at a bar, and Rory asking if he knew anyone who could help with a problem. Dominic admitted he knew immediately what Rory was really asking for. He talked about the $10,000 payment, half up front, half after the job was done. He described following Zara around town for months, wearing the mask, making sure she saw him, deliberately frightening her in parking lots and outside her apartment. He explained how Rory would text him with specific instructions about when and where to appear, the bathroom attack at the party. Dominic's voice got quieter when he described drugging her drink and carrying her to the bathroom, ripping her dress to make it look worse, then escaping out the window when he heard someone coming. Listening to all the details laid out like that made my stomach turn. I had to grip the bench to keep from standing up and leaving. This was the man I'd known for 30 years, the man who'd been at my wedding, who'd held Zara when she was a baby, and he'd done all of this to her for money. Dominic started crying on the stand when Reed asked if he had anything to say to Zara. He turned toward where we were sitting and said he was so sorry, that he knew sorry wasn't enough, but he needed her to know he regretted it every day, that he never meant for things to go so far. His voice broke and tears ran down his face. I looked at Zara expecting to see some reaction, but she just sat perfectly still. Her face was completely blank. She didn't cry, didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge his apology at all. Later that evening when Melania came by the house, Zara told her that Dominic's tears felt fake, like he was trying to manipulate everyone into feeling sorry for him. She said she didn't forgive him, and she wasn't required to forgive anyone who hurt her on purpose. Rory's trial started 3 weeks later in the same courtroom. His lawyer stood up for opening statements and immediately started blaming everything on Dominic. They claimed Dominic acted on his own without Rory's knowledge, that Dominic was obsessed with Zara, and Rory had no idea the stalking was even happening. Reed objected twice during the opening statement. When it was Reed's turn, he walked the jury through the evidence. He showed them bank records proving Rory withdrew exactly $10,000 the same day Dominic deposited that amount. He showed them phone records with hundreds of calls between Rory and Dominic over 6 months. He showed them text messages where Rory gave specific instructions about where to follow Zara and when to escalate. The defense's story fell apart before the trial even really started. There was no way to argue Rory didn't know when the evidence was that clear. The 2 women who dated Rory before Zara took the stand on the second day. The first one was 24 and described dating Rory for 8 months. She said he was inattentive and cold most of the time, but the moment she mentioned breaking up, he became obsessed with her location. She started having a stalker who followed her everywhere. Hooded figure who never spoke. The stalking made her so scared she stayed with Rory longer than she wanted to. The day after she finally broke up with him, the stalking stopped completely. She said she never connected it to Rory until Detective Shepard contacted her. The second woman told an almost identical story. Different timeline, but same pattern. Inattentive boyfriend. Mysterious stalker when she tried to leave. Stalking stops the moment the relationship ends. The pattern was so obvious several jurors were shaking their heads. Rory's lawyer tried to suggest these women were lying or mistaken, but Reed had phone records showing Rory called Dominic repeatedly during both of those relationships too. Zara took the stand on the third day. She wore a simple blue dress and her hair was pulled back. She walked to the witness stand without looking at Rory. Reed asked her to describe the stalking and she did. Months of seeing the masked figure, the fear that took over her life, changing her routines, looking over her shoulder constantly, not feeling safe anywhere. She described the night of the party, talking to me on the phone, her speech slurring, waking up in the hospital, learning that her boyfriend paid her Uncle Dom to terrorize her. Her voice stayed steady the whole time. She didn't cry or break down. She just told the truth calmly and clearly. When Reed asked how the stalking and betrayal affected her, she paused. Then she said it destroyed her ability to trust people, made her question every relationship, left her with nightmares and panic attacks. But she was working with a therapist and she refused to let what Rory did define the rest of her life. Several jurors were wiping their eyes. One woman in the back row was crying openly. Rory stared at the table the whole time and never once looked at Zara. When she finished testifying, she walked past the defense table without even glancing in his direction. I stood up and hugged her the moment she reached our row. She was shaking, but she'd done it. She'd told her story and nobody could take that away from her. Rory's defense lawyer stood up for cross-examination looking way too confident. He walked toward Zara with this fake concerned expression and started asking if she'd been under a lot of stress lately. No. Reed jumped up immediately and objected that the question was irrelevant. The judge agreed and told the lawyer to move on. The lawyer tried a different approach and asked Zara if maybe she'd imagined some of the stalking incidents because of her anxiety. Reed objected again, and the judge sustained it with a warning look at the defense table. When Reed got his turn for redirect, he asked Zara to list every stalking incident she remembered with specific dates and locations. She sat up straighter and started going through them one by one. September 15th outside the library at 2 in the afternoon. September 22nd at the coffee shop on Main Street around 6 p.m. October 3rd following her car from campus to her apartment. She kept going with perfect detail and clarity for each incident. Her memory was sharp and consistent. Several jurors were nodding and taking notes. The defense lawyer looked less confident now. The next day, Reed called a computer forensics expert to the stand. The expert explained he'd examined Rory's laptop and phone and found extensive search history related to psychological manipulation. Reed pulled up the searches on a big screen for the jury to see. The searches included phrases like how to make girlfriend afraid to leave and trauma bonding techniques explained and psychological control in relationships. There were dozens of searches over several months. The jury members looked completely disgusted as they read through the list. One older woman in the front row kept shaking her head. Another juror actually put his hand over his mouth like he might be sick. Reed walked the expert through each category of searches, showing clear premeditation and research into how to break someone down mentally. Rory stared at the defense table and his face turned red. His lawyer objected that search history didn't prove intent, but the judge overruled it. The evidence was right there in black and white, showing exactly what Rory had planned to do to Zara. Closing arguments happened on day 5 of the trial. Reed stood in front of the jury and laid out the entire case piece by piece. He described how Rory deliberately tortured Zara psychologically to maintain control over her. He pointed to the bank records showing the payment to Dominic. He referenced the text messages with specific stalking instructions. He showed the pattern with the 2 previous girlfriends who experienced the same thing. He talked about Rory's research into psychological abuse techniques. He ended by saying Rory had turned Zara's life into a nightmare on purpose, and he needed to be held accountable. The defense lawyer got up and tried to argue there was reasonable doubt about Rory's involvement. He suggested maybe Dominic acted alone and lied about the payment. He claimed the search history could have been for a psychology class. But his argument sounded weak compared to all the evidence. The judge spent 2 hours instructing the jury on the law and the charges. Then they filed out to deliberate while we all waited. The next 3 days were complete torture. We went home, but none of us could focus on anything. Zara barely ate, and I don't think she slept more than a few hours total. Austin drove back and stayed with us the whole time. We tried watching movies, but nobody could pay attention. We played card games, but kept losing track of whose turn it was. Every time my phone rang, we all jumped thinking it might be Reed with news. Zara kept pacing around the house, checking her phone every few minutes. On the 3rd day, she had a panic attack because she was so scared the jury wouldn't believe her. Austin and I sat with her until she could breathe normally again. I kept telling her the evidence was overwhelming, but she was terrified Rory would somehow get away with everything he did. On the afternoon of day 3, Reed called and said the jury had reached a verdict. We drove to the courthouse so fast I'm surprised I didn't get pulled over. The courtroom was packed with people when we got there. Zara sat between Austin and me in the front row right behind the prosecution table. Rory was brought in wearing his suit, and he still wouldn't look at Zara. The jury filed in, and none of them looked at Rory either, which Reed said was usually a good sign. The judge asked if they'd reached a verdict, and the foreman said yes. He started reading the charges one by one. Conspiracy to commit stalking, guilty. Assault with a controlled substance, guilty. Conspiracy to commit assault, guilty. Criminal stalking by proxy, guilty. Every single charge came back guilty. Zara started crying the moment she heard the first guilty, and by the end she was sobbing with relief. I held her hand tight and felt this huge weight lift off my chest. Rory dropped his head into his hands at the defense table. His parents were crying in the back of the courtroom, but I didn't feel sorry for them at all. 2 weeks later, we came back for sentencing. Reed argued that both Rory and Dominic deserved maximum sentences because of how calculated and cruel their actions were. He talked about the lasting psychological damage they'd caused and how Zara would be dealing with trauma for years. Rory's lawyer asked for leniency, saying Rory was young and had no prior record. The judge wasn't having it. She said Rory's actions showed sophisticated planning and complete disregard for another person's well-being. She sentenced him to 12 years in prison with no chance of parole for 8 years. Dominic got 6 years because he cooperated and pled guilty. When the judge announced Rory's sentence, Zara squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I didn't mind. Justice was finally happening. Outside the courthouse, after sentencing, a bunch of reporters were waiting with cameras and microphones. Zara surprised me by stopping to talk to them instead of rushing to the car. She stood there looking small but strong and said she wanted other victims of psychological abuse to know they weren't crazy and it wasn't their fault. She said abuse doesn't always leave visible bruises, and that doesn't make it any less real or damaging. She talked about how important it was to trust your instincts and reach out for help. Her voice stayed clear and steady the whole time she spoke. She answered a few questions about the trial and thanked Detective Shepard and Reed for believing her. When she finished, we walked to the car, and the moment we got inside, she started shaking. The bravery had taken everything she had, but she'd done it anyway. The following month, Zara moved into her new apartment across town. Austin and I helped her move boxes and furniture up 3 flights of stairs. She'd picked a building with a doorman and security cameras covering every entrance. The apartment was small but bright with big windows and hardwood floors. She spent weeks decorating it exactly how she wanted, with colorful throw pillows and plants on every surface. She installed extra locks on the front door and windows, even though the building was already secure. Having her own safe space that Rory had never been to and didn't know about seemed to help her relax a little. She could control who came in and out. She could lock herself in at night without worrying about anyone having a key. I visited Zara at her apartment a few weeks after she moved in. She answered the door in sweatpants and a college hoodie, looking more comfortable than I'd seen her in months. Her apartment smelled like the vanilla candles she loved, and she'd hung up photos of family and friends on the walls. She made us coffee and we sat on her small couch while she told me about going back to the school part-time. She'd enrolled in 2 classes to start and had gotten a job at a bookstore near campus. The work was easy, and her co-workers were nice. She was still seeing Melania twice a week for therapy and said she probably would be for a long time, but she was rebuilding her life piece by piece on her own terms. She seemed tired but hopeful in a way she hadn't been before. A month later, Austin called and asked if he could bring his new girlfriend to meet Zara. I was nervous about how Zara would handle meeting someone new, but she said yes right away. They came over to her apartment on a Saturday afternoon, and I showed up too because Austin wanted family there. His girlfriend was named Sarah, and she was warm and funny, and didn't ask Zara any awkward questions about the trial. We ordered pizza and played board games, and Zara actually laughed at Sarah's terrible jokes. It was the first time I'd seen her genuinely relaxed and happy in months. She wasn't looking over her shoulder or checking the locks every few minutes. After Austin and Sarah left, Zara told me she was starting to believe she could have normal relationships again someday. She said she wasn't ready to date yet, but seeing Austin happy with someone gave her hope that she could get there too eventually. 2 weeks later, Zara told me she'd found a support group for people who survived intimate partner violence. The meetings happened every Thursday night at a community center across town. I drove her to the first one and waited in the parking lot for an hour while she was inside. When she came out, her eyes were red, but she looked lighter somehow. She got in the car and buckled her seatbelt. She said it helped to talk to people who understood what she went through. Other women had experienced similar things with controlling partners and manufactured fear. She wasn't alone in this experience, and that made it feel less scary. She planned to keep going every week. The next Thursday, she drove herself and came home saying she'd exchanged numbers with 2 other women from the group. They were meeting for coffee on Saturday. Watching her build connections with people who got it made me feel like she was really healing. A month after that, I had my own breakthrough in therapy. My therapist asked me to describe Dominic as I knew him versus Dominic as he actually was. I started listing all the good memories from 30 years of friendship, the camping trips and late-night talks and times he helped me move. But then I realized none of those things were real in the way I thought they were. A real friend wouldn't stalk my daughter for money. The Dominic I knew was fiction. I'd been mourning someone who never really existed. My therapist said I could grieve the friendship I thought I had while accepting that person wasn't real. That perspective shift helped me start letting go of the guilt. I wasn't stupid for trusting him. He was just good at lying. 3 months after the trial, Zara mentioned she'd started seeing someone new. She brought it up casually while we were having dinner at my place. She said they met at the bookstore where she worked. He was patient with her anxiety and respected her boundaries completely. They were taking it incredibly slow, but she felt proud of herself for being willing to try. I asked a few questions about him without pushing too hard. She said he knew about the trial and what happened, but didn't treat her like she was broken. I told her I was happy for her if she was happy. She smiled and said she was cautiously optimistic. 6 months after the trial, Zara had a checkup with her doctor about her lupus. She came over that evening and told me the appointment went better than expected. Her stress levels had decreased, so much that her symptoms were way more controlled. The doctor was pleased with her progress and reduced one of her medications. She'd been on that med for 2 years. The physical healing was following the emotional healing. Her body was finally relaxing now that she felt safe. A week later, I was at the grocery store buying milk and bread when I saw a woman staring at me from the produce section. She walked over and I recognized her as Dominic's ex-wife. I hadn't seen her in probably 5 years since their divorce. She apologized for what Dominic did. She said she divorced him years ago because of his poor decisions and lack of judgment. She wasn't surprised he did something this terrible. It was strange comfort, but somehow it helped to hear that other people saw his flaws too. She asked how Zara was doing and I told her my daughter was healing. We talked for a few minutes, then went our separate ways. That conversation stuck with me for days. 2 months later, Zara called and asked if she could come over to talk about something important. When she arrived, she sat on my couch looking nervous but excited. She said she'd been thinking about changing her major. She wanted to switch to social work because she wanted to help other abuse survivors. She was turning her trauma into purpose and using her experience to understand what victims needed. I asked if she was sure and she nodded. She'd already talked to Melania about it, and her therapist said this was a healthy way to process what happened. She'd be good at it because she knew what it felt like. I told her I supported whatever she wanted to do. She started the paperwork to change her major the next week. A month after that, Austin called me sounding happier than I'd heard him in years. He said he'd proposed to his girlfriend and she said yes. He wanted Zara to be in the wedding. I congratulated him and told him I was thrilled. He asked me to tell Zara and see if she'd be okay with it. I passed the phone to Zara, who was visiting that day. She started crying happy tears and said yes immediately. They spent an hour on the phone planning and talking about wedding ideas. Watching my kids support each other and build happy futures despite everything they'd been through filled me with hope. Things were getting better slowly but surely. A year after the attack, I was home making dinner when my phone rang. It was Zara calling from her apartment. Her voice sounded different, lighter. She said she got accepted to a graduate program in social work at the university. She'd start in the fall. Her new relationship was going really well too. They'd been together 8 months and he treated her with respect and kindness. She said she still had hard days, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She was proud of the person she was becoming. I felt my throat get tight. I told her I was proud of her too, and I meant it with my whole heart. She'd survived something horrible and came out stronger. She was going to help other people survive too. We talked for another hour about her plans and her future. When we hung up, I sat on my couch and let myself feel grateful. My daughter was going to be okay.